Have you ever wondered what we mean by this mystery of the Trinity? What is it about? What is it that we Christians believe? Welcome to our Introduction to the Trinity series. My name is Sister Mary Magdalene. This is the second of a 12-part series dedicated to an introduction to the teaching of St. Thomas Aquinas on the Trinity. Today we will be speaking about the eternal and temporal processions of the divine persons, and also the potential heresies we want to avoid in our understanding of this. Now you may recall from last time that there are 3 stages or images of God in human beings, which correspond to the 3 ways in which human beings can participate in God's own life. Aquinas explains that the image of God is in a human being in 3 ways. First, inasmuch as one possesses a natural aptitude for understanding and loving God, and this aptitude consists in the very nature of the mind, which is common to all human beings. That is, all human beings have an intellect and a will. So we have this natural image of God in us. Secondly, as I mentioned, we have the image of grace, also known as the image of Christ in us, inasmuch as a particular human being actually and habitually knows and loves God, though imperfectly in this life. And again, this image consists in the conformity of grace. Thirdly, inasmuch as a human being knows and loves God perfectly, and this image consists in the image or likeness of glory, which we will have with him forever in heaven. The divine image in us, then, is not a static image of the divine essence alone, but rather it is the image of the Trinity of persons, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And I will talk more about this towards the end of our series. But first, let us look more deeply into the mystery of the Trinity as it has been revealed to us by God. I emphasized last time the fact that the Trinity can only really be known to us by revelation. And we could ask the question regarding this phrase, 3 persons in one God. What does this mean? And how is it possible? Is it merely an irrational contradiction, as some might claim, a complete paradox? Or is there a way of understanding something of this mystery, insofar as it has been revealed to us, even though we can never fully comprehend it in its totality? Let us begin by first looking at what it means to say that God is one, that is, the unity of the divine essence, before we then speak how he is also 3. St. Thomas Aquinas and the Church teaches that we can say something true about the Trinity. Aquinas begins his Summa Theologia with a treatise on the existence of God and the various attributes of the one divine essence. Sometimes this section of the Summa is called De Deo Uno, on the one God. But it should be noted that this is not because St. Thomas does not think the Trinity is important. However, pedagogically, just as God first revealed himself to the people of the Old Testament as one, before later revealing with the coming of Christ that he's also 3 persons, and just as we first say in the Creed, I believe in one God, it is important to emphasize from the start that we are not tritheists when we speak of the Trinity. That is, we do not believe in 3 gods. But we are, in fact, monotheists. We believe in one God. Then, once the consubstantiality, or oneness of being, oneness of substance, of the divine persons has been emphasized, we are free to look at their plurality, in other words, what distinguishes them, while always keeping in mind that the distinction of the divine persons does not do away with their one divine nature, or oneness of being. To sum it up then, we always have to hold together both what is common to the three divine persons and what is proper to each person. So what is common to the divine persons includes their oneness of being, equality in power, wisdom, goodness, and all the perfections that can be attributed to God, and the fact that all that God does outside of God, ad extra, as they say in Latin, such as all of his work of creation and redemption, is done by the three persons acting as one, in common. But there is also something that can be said properly of each divine person, which is not shared with the other persons. And it is this that distinguishes the divine persons from one another, so that we do not fall into what is known as the heresy of Sabellianism or modalism, which asserts that what we call the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit are just different faces of God, as if they were not really distinct persons. But they are really distinct persons, while still being one God. And that is the mystery which has been revealed to us, and which theologians throughout the ages have tried to articulate in a reasonable way. It is this mystery which we are called both to grapple with intellectually and also to pray with, such that it may penetrate more deeply into our own spiritual lives, far beyond this lecture series. So Aquinas begins his treatment of the Trinity, question 27 of the first part of the Summa Theologiae, his most famous work, by saying, having considered what belongs to the unity of the divine essence, that is, God as one, it remains to treat of what belongs to the Trinity of persons in God. In the next sentence, he explains what distinguishes the persons, where he says, because the divine persons are distinguished from one another according to the relations of origin, the order of the doctrine leads us to consider first the question of origin or procession, secondly, the relations of origin, thirdly, the persons. So we will follow Aquinas here in looking first at the question of origin or procession within the Trinity, secondly, their relations of origin, and then finally, later on, at each of the divine persons themselves, the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Let us begin then with the discussion of origin or procession within the Trinity. And I have to warn you, this is probably the more difficult of the talks, so let us be brave and trust in God's grace to help us. First, we should note that there are processions in God, and by processions, we simply mean that one divine person eternally proceeds from another, who is his principle or origin, where he comes from. That is, God the Son eternally proceeds or is generated by God the Father, and the Holy Spirit eternally proceeds from both the Father and the Son. I should also like to point out that these eternal processions remain within God himself, that is, within the divine essence, ad intra in Latin, interior to God or immanent, when we are speaking of the inner Trinitarian life. And this is the reason why we do not have three gods, but only one God, because the processions remain within the one divine essence. But although the eternal processions remain within the one divine essence, these processions can and do also extend into time by having some created effect in creatures, in which case they come to be called temporal processions. As the Dominican Thomist Father Gilles Emery explains, a procession is called eternal or temporal by virtue of its endpoint, the divine person proceeding within the unity of the one divine being is the eternal endpoint, so you have an eternal procession. And the created effect in which the earthly presence of the divine person is given is a temporal endpoint, so you have a temporal procession. On the one hand, then, God may act outside himself by creating and giving being to things on a simply natural level, that is in accordance with their natures. But in what we have called the temporal processions, also known as the divine missions, God acts in time by his grace and by giving supernatural gifts, such as faith, hope, charity, and other infused virtues to the soul. These divine missions are the temporal processions of the Son and Holy Spirit into the hearts of the saints, where the divine persons themselves are given and possessed in a new way, Aquinas says, as leading to or uniting with the end, that is, with God himself. So we have eternal processions within God's own life, or ad intra, and temporal processions, in which God acts ad extra, outside himself, by bestowing a created effect of grace and gifts in the soul. And the divine persons themselves actually come to dwell within the soul. They actually give themselves to the soul in the state of grace. Now, a proper understanding of what we mean by an eternal procession within God is extremely important for avoiding two main Trinitarian heresies of the past, which can still affect us today, and which have stemmed from a misunderstanding of this fact, that the eternal processions of the Son and Holy Spirit from the Father remain within God himself, and for this reason the divine essence is undivided. God still remains one essence, one divine intellect, one divine will, one God. The Trinitarian heresies that forget this are Arianism, or some form of subordinationism on the one hand, and Sabellianism, or some form of modalism on the other hand. So let us look at these. First, Arianism, or subordinationism, is that Trinitarian heresy which in some way subordinates one person of the Trinity, the Son in the case of Arianism, or the Holy Spirit, or both the Son and the Spirit in some form of subordinationism, which subordinates that person to another divine person, usually either to the Father alone or to both the Father and the Son, with the result that the subordinated divine person is no longer considered to be equal to God, and therefore takes on the rank of a creature or a demigod, something less than God himself. Now that is the heresy of Arianism, or subordinationism. Let us look then at the other extreme heresy, Sabellianism, or modalism. And that is the Trinitarian heresy that seeks to emphasize God's unity to such an extent that the divine persons are simply considered modes or faces of God, as seen in his effects, but are not really believed to be distinct divine persons. Now note, there is a way in which we can and should speak of the personal mode of being of each divine person as distinct within the Trinity. But that is very different from the heresy of modalism, which speaks of modes in order to avoid distinguishing the persons in reality. Now, the main problem with both Arianism and Sabellianism is that they take procession as meaning an outward act. Hence, neither of them, says Aquinas, affirms procession as existing in God himself. That is, they are confusing the temporal processions of God acting in the world by means of a created effect, such as grace, with the eternal processions that remain within God's own Trinitarian life. Yet we believe as Christians that God the Son proceeds from God the Father, and God the Holy Spirit proceeds from both Father and or through the Son, with the three persons still remaining one God, one divine essence. So let us ask God to increase our faith that he is three divine persons in one divine essence, one God, yet three persons, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. In the next video, I will share more with you concerning the divine processions and relations of origin.